In a world that measures a woman's worth by how quickly she responds, how much she gives, and how well she pleases, there is an ancient power in choosing stillness, not silence, not submission, but a quiet clarity that says, I do not chase, I do not perform, I simply am. Becoming a high-value woman has nothing to do with luxury bags, external beauty, or how desired you are by others. It begins the moment you no longer abandon yourself in the name of being loved. Let this moment land, because if you've ever over-explained, overextended, or overlooked your own needs, what you may have been missing is not love, but alignment. There is a certain strength in a woman who no longer needs the world to confirm her worth. She moves with a presence that cannot be borrowed, replicated, or negotiated. You can feel it when she walks into a room. Without needing to speak, her stillness speaks for her. She is not in a rush to prove herself, because she is already convinced of who she is. That quality, that quiet power, is the first sign of a high-value woman, and it begins with rooted presence. To be rooted is to live from the inside out, rather than the outside in. It means that your choices are no longer dictated by fear of rejection or hunger for approval. This shift does not happen by accident. It requires deep self-awareness and discipline, emotional discipline. Just like a tree anchors itself deep into the ground before it grows upward, a woman must anchor her identity not in the changing tides of relationships or attention, but in a still place within. That stillness becomes her strength. In relationships, this presence manifests as self-containment, not isolation, not emotional detachment, but a kind of inner reservoir where her validation, peace, and security are not sourced externally. She listens to others, but she no longer needs them to complete her. She shares her heart, but she doesn't empty it to be chosen. There's a story of an older woman who had been through many seasons. Divorce, betrayal, years of being overlooked. One day, a younger woman asked her, "How do you stay so calm when people disappoint you?" The older woman replied, "Because I stopped waiting for people to give me what I already decided to give myself. Respect, attention, peace. Everything extra is a gift, not a guarantee." That is the essence of rooted presence. It is the ability to remain undisturbed by external noise, because you've trained yourself to listen to the inner voice. When others act cold, you don't panic. When they disappear, you don't collapse. Because your identity is not up for sale. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who has learned to sit with herself and feel full. From a psychological standpoint, this rootedness is tied to secure attachment and emotional regulation. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for thoughtful decision-making, becomes stronger when we learn to pause, breathe, and stay present instead of reacting impulsively. Women who have developed this internal balance are less likely to be manipulated, because they don't need constant external reassurance to feel grounded. This doesn't mean she never feels pain, disappointment, or longing. It means she feels all of it, but processes it with maturity. Her emotions don't govern her, she governs them. Like a river that flows but does not flood, she moves with awareness. This presence is not about being emotionless. It's about becoming emotionally fluent. She knows when to express and when to observe, when to speak and when silence is more powerful. And the men who encounter her sense this immediately. It is disorienting to those who expect a woman to beg for their affection or lose herself in their attention. She doesn't compete. She doesn't chase. She invites. And if you're not ready to meet her at her level, she doesn't argue. She simply continues walking her path. With or without your approval. There is another story. A woman was once in love with a man who kept withdrawing. Each time he pulled away, she would chase, apologize, try harder to earn back his warmth. It exhausted her, until one day, something changed. The next time he distanced himself, she didn't follow. She simply stayed still, and in that stillness, she discovered peace. She realized she wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. She was afraid of losing someone who didn't value her presence. That realization became her turning point. From that moment, she stopped giving energy to anyone who made her question her worth. And her life began to change. This kind of emotional posture is not born from ego. It is born from alignment. It is the natural outcome of returning home to oneself. A high-value woman is not arrogant. She is simply not available for what drains her. And this availability is a direct reflection of her emotional responsibility. To be emotionally responsible is to recognize that your feelings are yours to own, not weapons to throw or burdens to hand off. It is the practice of holding yourself accountable for your reactions without needing others to behave perfectly for you to feel balanced. This is perhaps one of the most radical acts of self-love, to stop blaming and start healing. Emotional responsibility is not about ignoring pain. It is about engaging it with awareness. Many women have been taught to suppress their needs, to smile through disrespect, to accommodate even at the cost of their own dignity. But when you begin to take responsibility for how you allow others to treat you, everything changes. You no longer wait for apologies to find closure. You no longer expect people to understand your value before you honor it yourself. This internal shift rewires the nervous system. From a neurological perspective, emotional responsibility activates the brain's executive functions, allowing you to choose thoughtful responses instead of automatic reactions. It strengthens your ability to self-soothe. You move from chaos to clarity, and this clarity becomes your compass. Imagine a woman in a relationship where she constantly feels like she's walking on eggshells. Every word, every gesture is calculated so as not to provoke disapproval. This tension slowly erodes her joy. One day, she realizes she's been editing herself to keep someone else comfortable, and in doing so, she has lost connection with her own voice. That moment of realization is emotional responsibility knocking at the door. Taking back your emotional power does not require confrontation. It requires honesty. It is the decision to stop asking, "Why are they like this?" and start asking, "Why have I tolerated this?" That question changes everything. It brings you back into the driver's seat of your own life. No longer are you the passive recipient of other people's choices. You become the architect of your own peace. This shift also transforms how you love. When you are emotionally responsible, love is no longer a transaction. It is an offering. You don't love to be loved in return. You love because you are already full. This fullness protects you from manipulation, because you no longer confuse breadcrumbs with a feast. You know what true nourishment feels like, and you no longer settle for anything less. Emotional responsibility also allows for compassion. When others hurt you, you no longer carry the wound as a definition of your value. You can see their actions as a reflection of their inner state, not yours. This doesn't mean you excuse poor behavior. It means you stop internalizing it. You learn to say, "This is about them, not me." And that clarity allows you to walk away in peace, not bitterness. A woman once shared that she spent years waiting for closure from a man who left her without warning. She kept asking, "Why did he do this to me?" But over time, she shifted the question. She began asking, "What was I avoiding in myself that made his approval so important to me?" That question led her to deeper healing than any apology ever could. And in that healing, she discovered freedom. The moment you stop waiting for others to repair what they broke in you and begin the work of restoring yourself, you step into a new life, a high-value life. Because value is not in being wanted, it is in being whole. The irony is this: when you no longer need to be chosen, that is when you become the most magnetic. Not because you are pretending, but because your energy is clean. You are not reaching, grasping, or begging. You are simply present, rooted, responsible, and deeply at peace. The kind of woman who learns this becomes rare. Not because she's better than others, but because she's done the inner work most people avoid. And her presence begins to teach others, without words, what respect looks like. People rise or fall in response to her standards, not because she demands it, but because her energy makes it impossible to do otherwise. Relationships begin to take on a different tone. There is no longer the frantic need to be validated. There is space, grace, boundaries that are not aggressive, but firm. Love that is not conditional, but conscious. You begin to realize that emotional safety is not something you beg for. It is something you build. And it starts with you. This path requires courage. It is easier to blame than to take responsibility. It is easier to react than to pause. But for the woman who chooses to root herself and own her emotions, the reward is beyond anything fleeting. It is a life anchored in peace, a heart no longer hijacked by external storms, and a soul that walks with quiet power, undaunted, unshaken, and fully alive. There is a silent language every human being speaks long before words are spoken. It's not verbal, it's energetic. People don't just listen to what you say, they feel who you are. And this feeling, this frequency, reveals the foundation of how they relate to you. This is why personal energy is not just spiritual poetry, it's relationship psychology. A woman's energy is her boundary. It precedes her presence, defines how others perceive her, and often determines how they treat her before she even utters a word. Energetic integrity is the discipline of owning what you carry emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. When your inner world is in conflict, when you're anxious, self-abandoning, or seeking validation, you broadcast a frequency of lack even when your words say otherwise. You may speak about self-love, but if you're vibrating with desperation, people feel that misalignment. And unconsciously, they respond not to your words, but to your energy. We have all experienced the difference. A woman enters the room, and she doesn't need to be loud. She doesn't need a grand entrance. Her posture, her eyes, her calmness, it all says, I am enough, without arrogance, without apology. There is a sense of harmony in her presence, and you can feel that her energy is whole. That woman doesn't need to be chased, because she doesn't chase. She doesn't beg to be chosen, because she's already chosen herself. That's what energetic integrity means. It's when your thoughts, emotions, words, and behaviors are in alignment. It is when what you accept from others reflects what you believe you deserve. And that belief is not spoken, it is felt. You may not realize it, but when someone walks away from a conversation with you, they're left with a memory of your energy. Did you uplift or drain them? Were you at ease or uneasy within yourself? Were you seeking something or offering something? These unspoken dynamics leave the deepest imprint. Energetic integrity starts with how you treat yourself in the quiet. Not just when others are watching, but when you're alone. Are you gentle or harsh with your inner dialogue? Are you in the habit of overextending, saying yes to things that drain you, pretending to be okay when your soul is tired? Every time you betray your own needs in order to keep peace with others, your energy fragments. And fragmented energy is exhausting to carry. Worse, it makes it easier for people to cross boundaries, because those boundaries were never clearly anchored within you. A woman once shared her story. She had always been the peacemaker, the giver, the emotional caretaker. In every relationship, she was the one adjusting, sacrificing, pleasing. And every time, she felt more invisible, more unseen, until one day she broke down, not because someone else hurt her, but because she realized she had been hurting herself by refusing to be honest about her own exhaustion. She wasn't just tired from life, she was tired from living in contradiction, saying, I'm fine, when she was breaking, saying yes, when every cell in her body was screaming, no. That day, she made a decision to stop being loyal to her dysfunction, to stop treating self-abandonment like a virtue, and to start aligning her energy with truth. That decision didn't make her harder, it made her clearer. She began to walk away from conversations that drained her. She stopped explaining her worth to people who couldn't see it. She no longer allowed guilt to override her need for rest. And slowly, her energy began to return. With that restoration came clarity, and with clarity, confidence. That is the power of reclaiming energetic integrity. It's not about being cold, it's about being connected. First to yourself, then to others. In Eastern philosophy, the concept of ki, or life force, is foundational. It is believed that your energy flow directly influences your mental clarity, emotional health, and relational well-being. When your energy is low or scattered, everything feels heavy. Decisions become difficult. Relationships become draining. But when your energy is clean and centered, you move through life with ease. You become magnetic. Not because you're trying, but because you're aligned. In neuroscience, this alignment is mirrored in the coherence between the heart and brain. When you're in emotional balance, your heart rhythm and brainwaves synchronize. This creates a state of physiological harmony known as coherence. People who are in this state emit a calming, grounding presence. Others feel safer around them, more open, more respectful. Not because of charm or tactics, but because of energetic truth. This is the science behind intuition. Our nervous systems are constantly reading each other's frequencies. And your energy, whether grounded or chaotic, communicates long before your logic arrives. So what does this mean in relationships? It means that before setting boundaries with your words, you must set them with your energy. If you continue to entertain inconsistent communication, tolerate emotional breadcrumbs, or stay in spaces where you are not emotionally safe, you train others to ignore your value. But when you embody self-respect at the level of energy, people know, they feel it, and those who cannot match it will exit, not because you pushed them out, but because they simply cannot remain in a space where integrity is required. This is not easy. It often requires loss. You may lose people who were only attached to your lower frequency. The version of you that tolerated too much, apologized too often, gave too freely. But what you gain is far greater peace, clarity, dignity. You begin to attract relationships that don't require you to perform, shrink, or sacrifice your truth. And you realize that being alone in alignment is far more empowering than being connected in chaos. Now comes the challenge many women face when they begin to embody energetic clarity: the pushback. Some people will say you've changed, that you've become cold, distant, hard to please. But what they are really saying is this: I am no longer able to access you the way I used to when you didn't value yourself. And that is not your burden. That is their mirror. You were not put here to be palatable. You were put here to be whole. And wholeness often threatens those who benefit from your fragmentation. So yes, some doors will close, but in their closing, new ones open. Relationships where your presence is honored, your boundaries respected, and your soul at peace. This clarity in energy naturally gives birth to the next essential quality of a high-value woman: her standards. A woman who has done the inner work no longer resorts to ultimatums. She doesn't need to threaten or beg someone to respect her. Her life is built on quiet, consistent standards that speak louder than any emotional outburst ever could. A standard is not a demand. It is a reflection of what you believe is possible and non-negotiable for your life. It doesn't need to be screamed or repeated endlessly. It is expressed in how you live, how you choose, and what you walk away from. A woman with standards doesn't need to convince someone of her value. She simply moves in accordance with it. There is an old proverb that says, "Don't waste your time explaining. People only understand from their level of perception." A woman of value doesn't exhaust herself trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she lets her life speak. Her boundaries are not reactive, they are pre-decided. This kind of discipline comes from deep internal work, from knowing what aligns with your purpose and what drains your power. One of the most powerful things a woman can say in a relationship is not, "Change or I'll leave," but "I'm not available for this." Not as a threat, but as a truth. No anger, no argument, just clarity. A woman once shared how her partner constantly made jokes at her expense in social settings. She had asked him to stop multiple times, but the behavior continued. One evening, after yet another uncomfortable dinner with friends, she didn't yell, she didn't cry. She simply left the table, went home, and never returned to that dynamic. Not out of vengeance, but out of reverence for herself. That single act said more than any lecture ever could. When you raise your standards, you may find yourself walking alone for a season. But that solitude is not punishment, it is refinement. It is the space where you begin to see who you really are without the distortion of toxic attachment. You begin to reclaim your time, your voice, your direction. You realize that love should not cost your peace. And any connection that requires you to abandon your truth is not love, it is dependency. There is a moment in every high-value woman's journey when she must choose between being liked and being respected. These two are not always the same. You can be liked for your softness, your giving nature, your willingness to accommodate. But you are respected when you choose yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. When you hold your line, when you say, "This is not okay," and stand by it, even if it means being alone for a while. This is not an easy path, but it is a path that leads to self-trust. And once you trust yourself deeply, the need to micromanage others fades. You don't have to control or manipulate to get what you need. You simply attract what matches your energy and walk away from what doesn't, with grace, not guilt. This level of standard creates an invisible filter. The wrong people no longer linger, because they can sense that your energy is not a playground. It is a temple, and only those willing to honor that temple are allowed inside. The beauty of living with standards is that it simplifies your life. You no longer waste time trying to decode mixed signals or justify disrespect. You don't wait for someone to change. You observe, you decide, you move. That's it. Your peace is no longer negotiable, and your heart becomes a space of sacred discernment. Not everyone gets access. This discernment also sharpens your intuition. When your standards are clear, your decisions become easier. You know what aligns and what doesn't. You stop chasing potential and start honoring reality. You don't fall for words. You watch patterns. You don't settle for attention. You value intention. This shift is profound. It moves you from being reactive to being rooted, from begging to blessing, from surviving to thriving. In this space, love becomes a choice, not a transaction. You are not here to be someone's emotional project. You are not here to prove your worth through performance. You are here to live fully, love wisely, and walk in peace. And anyone who enters your world must be ready to rise, because you will no longer shrink. The moment you understand this, everything changes. You stop fearing loss, because you realize that nothing aligned can ever be taken from you. And everything that leaves simply creates space for something more sacred, more true, more you. Stillness is one of the most misunderstood forces in human relationships. Many associate it with weakness, with passivity, or even fear. But in truth, stillness, when chosen consciously, is a weapon of profound precision. It is a form of strength that neither attacks nor retreats. It simply watches, absorbs, and waits. The high-value woman understands this. She does not waste her power in trying to control outcomes. She knows that in stillness, the truth always reveals itself. In a world conditioned to react, the ability to remain still is revolutionary. We are taught to respond immediately, defend ourselves quickly, and prove our point before the silence makes us uncomfortable. But not everything requires a response. Not every insult deserves a reaction. Not every invitation into drama must be accepted. When a woman learns the art of strategic stillness, she reclaims her time, her peace, and her emotional clarity. There was once a woman who had been dating a man for several months. He would go days without communication, only to return with charming words and casual explanations. Her friends urged her to confront him, to demand consistency, to make him see what he was doing wrong. But she chose something else. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply stopped feeding the pattern. She didn't initiate conversations. She stopped entertaining apologies that came without change. She remained still, not out of indifference, but out of wisdom. Within a week, the man unraveled. The silence forced him to face the consequences of his inconsistency, and she, rooted in stillness, observed everything she needed to know without lifting a single emotional finger. Stillness reveals more than speech ever could. It exposes motives, uncovers masks, and lays bare intentions. When you do not react, people show you who they are. They either lean in or they drift away. Either way, you gain clarity, and clarity is power. This principle is deeply embedded in Eastern philosophy. In the Taoist tradition, the idea of Wu Wei, translated as non-action or effortless action, teaches us that sometimes the most effective thing to do is to not interfere. It is not a call to apathy, but a practice of alignment. The river does not push its way forward, it flows. The tree does not chase the wind, it bends, then returns to stillness. Likewise, a woman who embodies stillness does not chase answers. She allows truth to arise. Stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the mastery of thought. It is the ability to sit with your emotions without letting them take the lead. It is standing in the storm and refusing to be blown off course by temporary feelings. This form of emotional regulation is not taught in most relationships, but it is essential. From a neurological standpoint, this skill activates the parasympathetic nervous system, our body's built-in calming mechanism. When you choose stillness over reactivity, your heart rate slows, your breath deepens, your cortisol levels lower. Your brain becomes more capable of rational thought and long-term planning. You move from survival mode into a space of conscious creation. And in relationships, this matters immensely. Let's take a common scenario. A partner forgets something important, an anniversary, a promise, a detail that mattered to you. Your immediate impulse might be to lash out, to punish, to express your disappointment in anger. But if you've cultivated stillness, you wait. You breathe, you watch, and you ask yourself, not what will make me feel good in the moment, but what will serve the relationship in the long term. This pause can change everything, because stillness is not silence for the sake of suppression. It is space for observation. In that space, you gather information, not just about the other person, but about yourself. Why did this hurt me? What wound did it touch? What expectation did it betray? These are questions that cannot be answered in the heat of reactivity. They require a still mind, a reflective heart. One woman described how, for years, she reacted to every conflict in her relationship with panic. Raised voice, rushed texts, long messages filled with over-explaining. Until one day, she reached her emotional capacity. She sat in her room, phone in hand, mid-argument, and did something radical. Nothing. She put the phone down. She made tea. She watched the sky. And in that space, she realized she had been performing her pain, hoping someone else would validate it. But pain that needs performance never truly heals. That evening, she chose stillness. And from that day on, she stopped writing emotional novels to people who weren't reading. She became her own witness, her own validator, and her energy shifted. This is the quiet revolution of stillness. It returns your power to its rightful place, inside you. Stillness also teaches you that not every attack deserves your sword. When someone disrespects you, it is tempting to fight back, to argue your value. But the high-value woman knows, silence in response to disrespect is not weakness. It is a mirror. You allow their actions to speak for them. You observe who they become when you stop feeding them with emotional energy. And in many cases, that is all the evidence you need to make the next decision with dignity. There was a woman who discovered her partner had been dishonest. Instead of confronting him in a storm of accusations, she quietly collected the facts. She withdrew her energy without explanation, and when the truth became undeniable, she simply walked away. No drama, no spectacle, just silence and steps. That moment redefined her entire sense of self-worth, because she realized, what you tolerate teaches others how to treat you, and what you ignore allows people to deceive themselves. But what you walk away from, that teaches the deepest lesson of all. In relationships, we are often told that communication is the most important tool, and it is. But not all communication is verbal. Stillness communicates boundaries. It says, I will not fight for what should never be questioned. It says, I do not need to argue for the bare minimum. It says, if my presence does not inspire respect, my absence will teach it. This kind of clarity is sharp, it's quiet, and it's unforgettable. Stillness also allows for detachment from outcomes. You stop clinging to specific results. Whether someone stays, changes, apologizes, or grows, you release control not out of defeat, but out of wisdom. Because you understand what is meant for me cannot miss me, and what misses me was never meant to stay. This detachment is not indifference, it is trust. Trust in timing, trust in truth, trust in self. And this trust creates emotional safety, not just for yourself, but for others. When people know you are not reactive, they begin to feel safer around you. They can be more vulnerable, more honest, because they sense that your energy is anchored. You don't swing between emotional extremes. You hold space, not just for them, but for the relationship itself. One man once said about his wife, what makes her powerful is not that she always has the right answer. It's that she doesn't rush to give one. She listens. She reflects. Sometimes she says nothing at all. But when she finally speaks, everyone listens. That kind of presence is born from stillness. It cannot be faked. It must be cultivated. Cultivation requires practice. Begin with breath. When the impulse to react rises, take a deep inhale, count to 5, feel your feet, feel your body. Ask yourself, what would stillness do? Not suppression, not denial, but intentional pause. Let the moment pass through you before you pass judgment on it. This practice, done daily, becomes a habit, and that habit becomes your emotional sanctuary. Stillness does not mean you never speak. It means you don't speak until you're anchored in truth. It means your words come from clarity, not chaos, from vision, not vengeance. And when you do speak, your voice carries the weight of wisdom, not the residue of reactivity. In modern society, speed is mistaken for strength. Quick replies, fast decisions, instant gratification. But deep wisdom knows slowness is often the most powerful pace, because what is done quickly is often done carelessly. But what is done with stillness is done with precision. So the next time your heart feels the urge to respond quickly, prove your worth, or fix a situation in panic, choose stillness instead. Sit, breathe, observe. Remember, your power does not come from what you say or do. It comes from what you choose not to say and what you no longer tolerate. It comes from knowing that stillness is not the absence of action. It is the highest form of presence. And the woman who masters stillness, she doesn't just navigate relationships, she elevates them. Without pressure, without performance, just peace, unshakable, undeniable, unforgettable peace. There is a quiet transformation that begins in a woman when she no longer seeks peace in another person's presence, but finds it in her own. That moment, when she stops asking, "Who will love me?" and instead asks, "How can I become love itself?" marks the beginning of her rise into power, grace, and deep emotional fulfillment. This journey does not begin with outer change. It begins with devotion to inner growth. And it is this devotion, quiet and often unseen, that transforms a woman into a sanctuary. To become the sanctuary you seek means to stop chasing emotional safety in someone else's arms and begin creating it within yourself. It is the decision to stop living in reaction to others and begin building an inner world so grounded, so rich, that no external chaos can truly shake it. In relationships, this devotion changes everything. Because when a woman becomes rooted in her own emotional ecosystem, she is no longer available for love that feels like survival. Many women, often unconsciously, carry the burden of emotional overfunctioning. They try to fix, to heal, to anticipate the needs of others at the cost of their own inner alignment. They become the peacemakers, the forgivers, the ones who keep trying even when nothing changes. And while this devotion to love is admirable, it becomes dangerous when it is not first directed inward. Without a foundation of inner growth, even the most beautiful woman can become emotionally exhausted, depleted, and resentful. One woman described how for years, she attracted partners who were emotionally unavailable. Each time, she believed that if she just gave more, waited longer, loved harder, she would eventually be seen. But over time, her spirit began to crack. The more she gave, the more invisible she felt. Until one day, she sat in silence and realized the painful truth. She had never made a commitment to herself. Her energy had been entirely focused on being chosen. She had never paused to ask, "Do I choose myself?" That moment became her awakening. She began slowly to reverse the pattern. She stopped trying to prove her worth through sacrifice. She stopped expecting someone else to complete what was missing. Instead, she started building rituals of devotion. Not to impress or to perform, but to restore. She began walking every morning before sunrise, letting her body return to rhythm. She journaled, not to analyze others, but to understand herself. She sat in silence, even when the silence felt uncomfortable. And in that process, something shifted. Her posture changed. Her voice grew steadier. She no longer felt frantic when a message went unread. She no longer mistook inconsistency for mystery. She could finally say, "I know who I am, even when no one else sees me." That is the power of becoming the sanctuary. It's not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about becoming the place where your own heart feels safe to land, regardless of who comes or goes. This kind of inner growth is the most attractive energy on earth, not because it is loud, but because it is real. In relationships, it allows for clarity. You begin to see who can truly meet you, not from a place of fantasy, but from a space of self-awareness. You stop chasing intensity and start valuing stability. You no longer get caught in the highs and lows of chaotic affection. You want something calmer now, something slower, something sacred. Devotion to inner growth also means that you no longer wait for pain to force your evolution. You choose it daily. You study your triggers. You become curious instead of reactive. You ask, what part of me still believes I must earn love, instead of blaming others for withholding? This self-inquiry, done with compassion, becomes the foundation of emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is the currency of healthy relationships. From a psychological lens, inner growth strengthens emotional intelligence. It deepens your self-regulation and increases your ability to connect without codependency. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reason and long-term planning, becomes more active as you develop reflective practices. You become less impulsive, more intentional. You learn to differentiate between emotional hunger and emotional connection. And this ability to self-observe rewires your relationship patterns. There is a quote that says, "Don't seek the light, become it." The high-value woman doesn't just wait for a partner who understands her. She becomes someone who deeply understands herself. She creates her own emotional weather. On days when the world feels cold or disconnected, she doesn't shrink. She warms herself from within. Through small but sacred habits, she builds a relationship with her own soul. She reads not to impress, but to nourish. She meditates not to escape, but to return. She sets boundaries not to punish, but to protect. Her life becomes a reflection of quiet power, not performance. One morning, a woman stood in front of the mirror and noticed the difference. Not in her face, but in her eyes. They no longer looked tired. There was a fire, steady and calm, that hadn't been there before. She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in years, she felt like home to herself. That feeling, that sense of inner homecoming, is what every relationship needs in order to thrive. Not two people filling each other's voids, but two souls who have come home to themselves, meeting in wholeness. Inner growth also teaches a woman to be deeply discerning with her energy. When you become your own sanctuary, you realize how sacred your time, your space, your attention truly are. You no longer tolerate conversations that feel empty, touch that feels disconnected, or relationships that feel like guesswork. You want reciprocity, not intensity. You want truth, not performance. You want effort, not potential. And because you are full within, you are no longer tempted by emotional breadcrumbs. There was a woman who once said, "I used to be impressed by butterflies in my stomach. Now I look for peace in my chest." That shift speaks to the essence of maturity. When your inner world is tended to, you no longer confuse chaos with passion. You can walk away from what feels familiar but unsafe, and you do so without bitterness. Only gratitude for the lesson. Devotion to inner growth also creates humility. You begin to see your own patterns, your wounds, your defenses, and you no longer project them onto others. You take responsibility for your healing. This makes your love less reactive and more responsive. You can hold space for others without losing yourself. You can listen without needing to fix. You can stay soft without becoming small. This softness is not weakness. It is the result of deep inner work. A woman who has grown herself from the inside out knows how to forgive, not because she forgets, but because she refuses to carry poison. She knows how to walk away, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. She knows how to stay present, not because she fears losing someone, but because she values the moment for what it is. In her presence, others feel something rarer: safety. Not the kind that comes from control, but the kind that comes from consistency. She becomes the kind of woman people remember. Not for how loud she was, or how much she gave, but for the way she made them feel seen, even when they couldn't see themselves. But most importantly, she remembers herself. She returns to herself daily, through practices that realign her, through reflections that deepen her, through stillness that heals her, because she knows that everything she wants from another, love, safety, connection, must first be built within. Not perfectly, not all at once, but with quiet devotion. A woman once wrote a letter to herself and placed it in her drawer. It said, "I will no longer abandon myself to be chosen. I will no longer ignore my intuition to feel wanted. I will no longer perform peace while my soul aches. I will grow. I will pause. I will learn how to hold myself in the same way I've always tried to hold others." That letter marked the beginning of a new era, not because everything changed around her, but because everything started to change within. And the beauty of this inner shift is that it ripples outward. Your relationships begin to reflect your growth. You begin to attract those who meet you in presence, not projection. Those who see you clearly, not through the lens of fantasy. You no longer become a mirror for someone else's wounds. You become a reflection of healing. This journey never ends. Inner growth is not a destination, it is a daily return. But with each return, you feel more at home in your body, more clear in your mind, more at peace in your heart. And from this space, love no longer feels like a transaction. It becomes a natural extension of who you are. When you've spent years searching outside yourself for peace, it can be disorienting to realize that the sanctuary you've longed for was never in someone else's arms. It was within your own breath, your own awareness, your own stillness all along. But once you realize this, you rise differently. You walk into relationships no longer asking to be rescued, but to be met. No longer asking to be filled, but to be mirrored. No longer asking, will you choose me? But declaring, I have already chosen myself. And that kind of woman, devoted not to perfection, but to inner growth, becomes a force of love the world is rarely ready for, but always remembers. When a woman decides to stop waiting for validation, for completion, or for someone to choose her before she chooses herself, she becomes unstoppable. Not because she's louder, not because she demands it, but because she no longer negotiates her value. She no longer allows her peace to be held hostage by uncertainty or conditional love. She becomes deeply rooted in who she is, and from that root, everything flourishes. This journey is not about becoming untouchable, it's about becoming unshakable. It's not about rejecting love, but about no longer settling for love that asks you to abandon yourself. It's not about becoming hard, it's about becoming whole. And in that wholeness, you draw people who meet you with the same clarity, depth, and intentional presence. The high-value woman is not defined by how others see her, but by how she sees herself when no one is looking. She does not chase connection. She creates it, first within, and then with others who honor her reflection. She is the sanctuary she once searched for. And from that sacred place, everything begins to change, not because she demands more, but because she became more.